We would like to welcome you today to this session on remote work and the key considerations that you should keep in mind as a business professional. COVID certainly has had an impact on the work environment, with the majority of employees moving to some sort of remote work situation. So it is definitely a timely topic and one that we plan to cover in a variety of capacities. I am going to be covering the HR side of things. And my name is Lori Dahlberg, and I am the HR Consulting Manager here at Eide Bailly. I've been with the firm for, I think it's 18 years now, and have been involved in human resources for over 30 years of my career. So I'm going to be talking about the HR side of things as it relates to remote work. And then we are going to have two other professionals talk about cybersecurity and also the tax implications. So Anders Eriksson and Jared Johnson will both be presenting on their areas of expertise once I am done. So before we start having a conversation about what you should be considering in this world of remote work, it's important to understand why we're having the conversation. Prior to COVID, 4.7 million employees worked remotely. 88% of organizations worldwide made it mandatory or encouraged employees to work remotely after COVID-19 was declared a pandemic. And just in the United States alone, remote work has risen by 173% between 2005 and 2018. And once we get through surveys for 2020, I anticipate that that number will go up greatly. There are a lot of people working remotely right now, and that brings with it some efficiencies and definitely some benefits from work-life balance perspectives, but it also creates some issues for employers. So that is what we are going to be talking about today. My session is going to cover how to set up your employees successfully so that they can successfully work remotely. We're also going to talk about conducting effective meetings remotely, managing and engaging remote employees, and the impact of COVID-19 on HR, some of the things that we have seen in HR since March of 2020. I always like to start off knowing kind of what the audience has going on with regards to remote work. So I'm going to ask a polling question. What percentage of your workforce is currently working remotely? Okay, so actually I'm very surprised by this, that it is only 38% of you have between 1 and 25% of your workforce. But at least when we're looking at this, there's only 6% of the attendees who don't have anyone working remotely. And perhaps they're joining the session because they want to find out what to do in the event that they need to have remote workers. But it does look like a majority of folks have at least some percentage of their workforce. 7% of you had 100% of your workforce working remotely. So certainly this topic will be timely. So my next polling question is, for those of you who have employees who are working remotely, what's the primary reason that they are? Is it because you have a preference for them to work remotely? Is it because they have a preference, or is it strictly because of COVID-19? Okay, so as anticipated, COVID-19 really has forced us to change how we are having our employees complete their work. 79% of you have indicated that your employees are working remotely because of COVID-19, and that is no surprise. So what we're going to talk about today is really going to help you in setting things up so that you are successful with having remote workers. So first thing we're going to talk about is what you as an employer can do to make sure your employees are properly positioned to be successful working from home. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is to establish expectations regarding how employees should work from home. Some of those expectations could be, when are they allowed to work remotely? Is it full-time? Is it a few days a week? Is it on an as-needed basis? You really need to stipulate that so that you can avoid having employees who work from home when they want to and come into the office when they want to, and that's not meeting you or your customers or clients' expectations. So you want to make sure that if you have employees who are working from home, you're setting up the expectation with regards to when they can work remotely. and I apologize, I will use the terms working from home and working remotely interchangeably. During COVID, most people are working from home or some other type of an office location as opposed to going into your office. In a normal world, when we talk about working remotely, people might work from coffee shops or things of that nature, but that's less likely right now with the quarantines in place. But I will kind of refer to them interchangeably as working remotely or working from home. You also are going to want to make sure that you establish the expectation with regards to your core business hours. Do you expect all of your employees to be reachable between the hours of 9 and 3? So that you know that they're available for you to reach out to, customers can reach out to them, or are you allowing them to work whatever hours they want? Now, saying that they need to be available between 9 and 3 indicates that they can log in earlier and get their full day in, but they're expected to be logged in between 9 and 3, or they can stay later and work well into the night if they want to, but they're still expected to be available between 9 and 3. You need to establish what your core business hours are, where you expect employees to be online and available. Another expectation would be to let employees know how they can request the equipment or supplies that they need to do their job. At Eide Bailly, when we were told, hey, everyone's working from home, we were told we could bring our computer home, we could bring any displays or screens home that we wanted to. We just had to make sure that we documented it. We took pictures of the cabling. Our IT staff was fantastic at helping us figure out what we could take from our own offices and then how to request additional equipment or supplies once we got home. So it's important to share that information with employees so that they're not going off and purchasing things from more expensive vendors, or that they're not taking things home from the office that you really don't want them to take home. So help them figure out how they can request the equipment or supplies that they need to do their job. The other thing you need to talk about is, are there expectations for them with regards to going into the office? You may operate in a state where you don't have the quarantines in place that are as strict as in other states. And so your employees can go into the office, and yet some may choose not to because of COVID and the fear of getting COVID. So are there expectations with regards to going into the office? How often do you expect them to come into the office if they're working remotely? Are there certain projects or face-to-face interactions that require them to be in the office? And what is the protocol for them when they do want to come into the office? Do they need to let your office manager know or your HR representative know that they're coming in so that it can be documented? Do they need to wear masks and things of that nature? What are the expectations with regards to them going into the office? You also want to talk about how working remotely affects PTO or vacation or sick leave. When people are working from home, it's a little bit easier to, do personal things, put a load of laundry in, go shopping in the middle of the day, do different things. What are your expectations with regards to how employees use PTO? Is it, if you don't put in your full 8-hour day working, you need to take some PTO? If you're sick and you were able to do a little bit of work, but not a full day's worth of work, do you need to take some sick leave? You want to make sure that you are very, very clear on that, because a lot of employees may misunderstand it and may not utilize those benefits that they're accruing, even though your intention is that they do so. I can speak from personal experience. I was supposed to go to Italy for 2 weeks last June. Of course, that got canceled, but I had stockpiled a lot of vacation time. And over the summer, I certainly was busy working, but there were some days where I was like, you know what, I don't have as much to do today. I'm going to take 4 hours of PTO and just hang out and do things around my house or go for a walk or do something to utilize my PTO. I'm not working my full day, so I'm making sure that I'm using it and that I'm not abusing the fact that my employer can't tell that I'm not working. I know that the expectation was that I use my PTO. So you want to make sure that you establish those expectations and communicate them appropriately. The other thing you want to make sure employees understand is that working remotely will affect work relationships. When we're not in the office seeing one another in the break room or we can't just pop over to someone's desk and have a conversation, it does start to affect work relationships. And so employees need to understand that there is an expectation that they figure out a way to still maintain work relationships with those individuals within their department, within the office, or even with customers. You want to make sure that they know that when you can't be face-to-face, it is going to affect work relationships, and they need to make sure that they're doing what they can in order to still establish those strong connections. And then the last thing on this topic is to make sure people do understand that working remotely can affect career progression. When you are working remotely and you are not in the office and a special project comes up, something that has to be taken care of immediately, it is just human nature for whoever has that project to go to the people that they can see right in front of them and say, hey, I've got this that needs to get taken care of. Can you help me out with it? If somebody wants to work remotely all the time, they're not in the office, they may not be there when those types of opportunities come up, and therefore may be overlooked for those kinds of opportunities. It's somewhat an out of sight, out of mind type of a mentality. And so employees need to understand that that could potentially happen, and that if they're not getting in on those special projects, that it could affect their career progression. Now, that means that they need to take it upon themselves to stay connected, to make sure that the people within their group know that they have capacity to take on projects, or might have a skill set or an interest in taking on new projects, so that they don't miss out on getting those opportunities that can help their career progression. The next thing you'll want to do after you have established expectations is that you want to make sure you have a remote work agreement for employees that outlines their remote work situation. So it is going to document the details of the remote work arrangement, and it could include many of the factors that we just discussed on the expectation side. So in there, you're going to want to include the duration of the work arrangement. So will the individual work X number of days per week, X number of months out of the year? Will they be doing remote work full-time or part-time? You want it documented. You also want to make sure that you document their remote work location, whether they are working from home, a parent's home, some other location. Maybe they have a summer home in Florida that they're going to work from throughout different points of the year. Wherever it is that they plan to work, you want to make sure that that is documented, because if you are working on confidential types of information, you want to make sure you know where these employees are working and who else might see the different types of work product that they are taking care of. You want to make sure that you document the company equipment that is provided. And I know that Anders is actually going to cover a little bit on this topic, but with regards to company equipment, if they are taking home a laptop or a screen or a printer or a phone system, headset, anything work related, you want to make sure that you get the make, model, asset tag numbers to specifically detail what equipment they took with them to work remotely. You may even want to consider taking a photo of the equipment to document the condition of it prior to them removing it from your office location. What this can help with is that if the employee terminates their employment, or if you terminate their employment, you know exactly what type of equipment you need to get back. And if it comes back to you in poor condition, you have a photo showing the condition that it was in prior to leaving the office. You want to make sure that you have an acknowledgement of the company policies regarding your confidentiality, your systems, or your work product access. So you'll detail that, as well as an acknowledgement for the provision of daycare for those who have small children at home. Working remotely is not a substitute for daycare. I know that during the pandemic, we have a lot of people working from home with little kids. If the individual, if it's outside of the pandemic, you want to make sure that individuals who have small children have made arrangements for childcare so that they actually are working and not taking care of their children and working sporadically. So you can have an acknowledgement in there to make sure that they have daycare or some sort of childcare for those who have small children. Once you have things documented, you can have the employee and their manager or whomever in your organization is at the right chain of command sign and date the remote work agreement. And then you will want to make sure that you file it in their employee personnel file. We encourage you to regularly look at remote work agreements, either on an annual basis, or if they're doing it for a short period of time, after that period of time is up, that you go ahead and say, all right, hey, we told you you could work remotely for 3 months. It's been 3 months. Are we going to continue it, or are you going to be required to come back into the office? That you're revisiting it. That way you can update it if there's any additional equipment that has been given to them. If somebody was fortunate enough to get the latest upgrade in their computer, you can document that. You can document whether it's full-time or part-time now. If they've had children, you can put in the piece about childcare. If their children are no longer at home, you can remove that component. So you just want to make sure that you're updating it frequently so that it represents the current remote work arrangement that you have for the employee. The next thing you can do to set your employees up to be successful is to provide them with a list of best practices. And I've been doing a lot of research on this, and some friends of mine and I actually had a pretty big conversation about this while I was on PTO last week. Some of them do not feel like they are set up well for a remote work arrangement, and others feel like they know exactly what they're doing and that they've become far more efficient and effective working from home. As an employer, you can tell employees that there are best practices, that you will be more successful if you do a few things. And here's some of the best practices that I was able to research and find, and that I truly do find work very, very well for myself and for other individuals that I've talked with. The first one is to establish a workspace. It needs to be a space that is separate from any of your other personal space in your house. I converted my craft room into my office craft room. The only time I am in this room is when I am working. If I want to craft, I grab my craft supplies and I go somewhere else. This room is now where I work, and it's the only place that I work. I don't take my computer and go down to the kitchen. I don't go into the family room. I have a separate place where I can work. Now, for those who live in a studio or an apartment or a smaller setting where they don't have a separate room, you can find a space within your home. Maybe it's one section of the kitchen table, or it is a little nook in the family room. You have to create a space, a specific space that will keep you free from distractions and disruptions. It's been identified as your workspace. Other members of the household know that that's where you go to work and not to bother you if you are working. And a space where you can actually set it up with all of the tools and equipment that you need so they can just stay out, and you don't have to, put your computer away in your computer bag and bring it to a different room and set it up. And then the next day you take it all down and you move it somewhere else. Have a designated space. If someone's going to work from home, this is critical. The other thing that you can provide to them as a best practice is to get up each day and get ready for work. It is so easy when you are working, especially working from home, to just roll out of bed. You know that you don't have any face-to-face meetings, or at least you think you don't have any face-to-face meetings set up for the day, to just, maybe brush your teeth and wash your face and then go sit down in a chair, still in your pajamas or your sweatpants, and start working. Your brain cannot make the adjustment from bed to work without some sort of transition. Right? So getting up every day, showering, going through your morning routine, whether, you do your hair and your makeup or you don't do your hair and your makeup, it doesn't matter. But just actually getting up and having a routine, having breakfast, getting your coffee, sitting down at a certain time, dressing for work. I'm wearing jeans today because nobody's going to see anything below my waist anyway. But I always have on some sort of nice top or a sweater. It makes me feel like I'm still professional and ready for work. And there is something to be said for the mental transition that happens when you physically get yourself ready for work. It tells your brain that it's work time and it's not still relaxation. I'm still in my pajamas or sweatpants time. It really does make a difference to help people operate far more efficiently and effectively if they are working remotely. And the next thing is to keep regular work hours. Set a consistent start time and an end time for your work days and focus on work during those hours. That sets you up to be accountable, because it is super easy when you're working remotely to just say, oh, you know what, I didn't get it done this morning, so I'll just keep working until midnight, right? Remote work impedes on your personal life if you don't set up parameters. So having a consistent start and end time for your day that keeps in mind what the organization's core business hours are when we expect people to be available can really be beneficial. And again, you want to consider who it is that you work with, your colleagues, your manager. You want employees to also consider customers or clients and what their expectations and needs are. But having that start and end allows us to focus on work and then still have our personal life, since we are in our personal space. My son does some weightlifting at school right now. He's very involved in high school sports, and he picked the 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. workout time, which is great. Makes me get up, get out of bed. I have to take him and I pick him up, but that means that I can't start work at 8 o'clock. So I have actually blocked it off on my calendar. I start work at 9 o'clock. I work through lunch, and I will keep working. I usually try to be done by 5:30 so that I can go pick him up from his sporting activities. And then if I have big projects that I need to work on, I will work on those later that evening. But I try to be available during my core hours of 9 to 5:30. People know that they can get in touch with me during those times. It really, really does make a difference, and it helps employees be far more effective. So sharing just some of these can really go a long way. The other thing employees can do is to really plan their workflow. We all have different priorities, different things that we have to get accomplished every day, because you have so many distractions at home anyway. There's always vacuuming, dusting, laundry, kitchen responsibilities, cooking, all that kind of stuff sitting right here with us while we're trying to work. Because we have those distractions, it is so important to set to-do lists and identify what are my biggest priorities that I have to get done. When do I have to get them done by? Which of these can take minimal effort? And you want to make sure that you're taking care of those tasks that really need to be completed and not wasting your time on the ones that are just a nice to get done. Complete highest priority tasks first, and do your hardest work when you have the most energy. I'm a morning person, so I usually will try and focus on things first thing in the morning and getting things taken care of. As the afternoon lingers on, I tend to not be as focused, so I try not to work on my big detail, high priority projects later into the afternoon unless I have to. You also want employees to know that they should break up their day. They should have break periods. There should be times when they get up and get out of their house and go for a walk or cook breakfast or cook dinner or make a lunch. They need to have break periods, because when they're in the office, they traditionally do, they just don't realize that they're really breaks. Standing up, going over to talk to a coworker, even if it's about work, there's going to be some personal conversation that happens. That's a nice mental break. Going to the break room to get water or a snack or to get lunch, that's a break. When we're at home, we tend to just sit in our chair and work, and we don't take those breaks, and it really can create some inefficiencies. So make sure employees know that they should break up their day, have set times for when they would like to take breaks. And of course, you know, if there's a high priority project, that's going to steamroll over the break, but they should really plan to have some breaks in the day just to help their mental well-being. And then one of the most important things that an employee should do is make sure that they have the right resources and technology. And you as an employer need to provide them with that. Employees need to have reliable high-speed internet. I don't know how many of you have either a roommate, a spouse, a significant other, and children at home right now. My son has not been back to school since March, so it's my husband, myself, and my son all on the internet all day long. And unless we have really good high-speed internet, that's not going to work. And we had to make an adjustment there and get a different internet provider so that we could all do what we need to do during the day. You also need to make sure that you have some sort of video conferencing tool for employees to utilize. Video conferencing is replacing the face-to-face. So Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams, whatever type of technology that you feel comfortable with. I think there's GoToMeetings as well. Have some sort of tool available for your employees to use, show them how to use it, and encourage them to use it. When we'll get to talking about meetings here in a minute, and in that conversation, we'll talk about the importance of trying to do video conferencing every single time that you talk with somebody, if you can, if it makes sense, just because we're missing out on that by working remotely. You also want to make sure that you're providing the proper computer, monitors, printers, scanners. If there are security issues with regards to any of those things working remotely, figure out a way to still allow employees to have those technologies and have the security parameters in place. Certainly working remotely, a lot of organizations, especially professional service providers, don't allow their employees to print anything, just because having it outside of the office can really have issues with confidentiality. The problem is, if an employee isn't allowed to print something while they're working remotely, what they're going to do is they're going to forward the email to whoever, their roommate or whomever is at home with them, and ask that person to print it off. If they really want to print it off, they're going to find a way to print it off. And so organizations should set up the proper security protocols to allow employees the ability to utilize the right types of equipment to do their job. And then last but not least, the software. You have to make sure employees can access the software that your organization utilizes in order for them to get the job done. And sometimes that software is better handled inside of the office than it is remotely. You're going to have to figure out a way to make that software available so that it is efficient outside of the office as well. Additional things that you can do is to identify and share contact information that employees can utilize whenever they have issues and help them figure out backup plans. I cannot tell you how many issues we had initially when everyone was working remotely. Things were very, very slow. The servers were a little bit slow. And so we had to work with our help desk and our AT department. There were a lot of people who had questions about benefits and things of that nature that they couldn't get access to once they were outside of the office, or they didn't know who to go to. And so we were able to put together just a contact list where, hey, employees, if you have an issue with your computer, with any type of equipment that you took out of the office, here's who you call. If you have a question about this, here's who you call. And then as I was working on different projects, I realized, okay, Zoom times out after 40 minutes. So I shouldn't use Zoom if I have an hour-long meeting. So what's my backup plan for that? Okay, we were in the transition from Skype to Teams. And so I would set it up with Skype, and sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. And now Teams is fantastic. So I just use Teams for everything, but I always had a backup plan that, hey, I'm going to schedule this as a video conference. If it doesn't work, here's the phone number to call. So we have that backup plan. The other thing you want to do with your employees is to make sure that you are communicating and checking in regularly. Not hearing from you is not an ideal way to manage the people that might work with you or might work for you. And that even goes for colleagues, right? So schedule weekly, monthly meetings or something to touch base. It's so, so important. We're all missing out on those break room conversations. We're all missing out on I'm getting up from my desk to walk over to Carrie because she has a candy dish, right? We're not doing that anymore. Who were the people that I would stop and see along the way and just visit with? You still need to make sure you're staying in touch with those people and developing those relationships that we indicated were so important. When you have meetings, start off with some of that break room conversation rather than just jumping right into the work topic. Ask people how they're doing. Have they stepped outside of their house recently? What are some things that they're doing to stay sane while they're being quarantined? Just have those normal conversations, ask how their families are, and those types of things. And then stay in the loop with your coworkers. You have to keep those personal relationships going. Eventually, we're going to get back into the office. I mean, I really, really hope that that's going to happen at some point here soon. When we do, we want to make sure that we still know who our coworkers are. They may look a little different, their hair may have grown out or may have gained a pound or two, but we still want to make sure that we know who they are and have a relationship with them. And as much as possible, you should encourage face-to-face interactions. Whenever I am calling somebody within Eide Bailly, I always use the video feature. They can choose to accept video or to just join via phone, but I always encourage the face-to-face because that's what it would be like if I was in the office. If I was in the office and was going to talk to this person, I'd walk over to their desk and I would see them face-to-face. So I personally resist always using email to respond with coworkers and clients. With clients, I try and set up a specific time. I set up the Teams video conference, and I can tell you I have much better relationships and much better conversations and interactions with individuals when I am talking face-to-face with them. You want to make sure that you're staying connected and that you are setting up social gatherings with employees so that you can get together. We still have a monthly birthday celebration in our Minneapolis office. It's scheduled. Depending upon how many people RSVP and say they're coming, they might have breakout rooms for people to talk. But like the first 5 minutes is, hey, we want to say happy birthday to all these people. We're supposed to bring some sort of a beverage. And we just kind of have just a social interaction. They did our Christmas party via video conference. My HR team, it was probably one of the best HR functions that we've had. We learned how to make some different cocktails. We had our boss sent us a gift card for like $10 to go purchase materials for snacks so that we could have snacks. Like it was a happy hour. We played games. There are so many opportunities out there and different types of activities that you can do to still host super fun events, even if it is via video conference. So don't forget to do those types of things because remember, employees didn't just join your organization for the paycheck and for the work. They joined for a social reason as well. And when you used to have holiday parties or celebrations or lunches, if you're not having them now, employees are getting bored just sitting at home only doing the work stuff. They want to have the fun stuff as well. So set up monthly lunches with your department. Just say it's at noon. Come with your lunch already prepared and we'll just visit, or we're going to host this meeting over lunch or over coffee and a donut or whatever. Set up opportunities for you to still have some fun via video conference. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about conducting effective meetings remotely. And really, the same protocols apply to having remote meetings as apply to having in-person meetings, right? You want to make sure you're inviting the right people. Don't invite people who don't need to be there. You want to make sure that everybody is involved in the meeting, that you have an agenda, a start time and end time, you keep the meeting flowing properly. All those things still apply. The thing is, when you are doing everything via video conference, it's almost exponentially enhanced as to who should be there and shouldn't be there, because you can tell who doesn't want to be there. They tend not to turn their camera on. They don't participate in the meeting at all. You don't hear a peep from them. So their name and their little screen tend to go all the way to the bottom, or might go off the page if you have enough people who are participating. So you want to make sure you're only inviting people who really need to be in the meeting. There are a couple of different reasons why you would want to utilize some sort of video conference technology for a meeting, and that is if you are facilitating a presentation, much like what we're doing right now, you want to make sure you're selecting a technology that allows the presenter to share their screen, a technology that allows you to mute all other participants, and the ability to turn off their video so that it's just the video of the person who's presenting that's showing. And the reason for that is the more people that are on the system with video, it just eats up bandwidth and can make things a little bit choppy, or just makes it, there's more opportunity for interruptions. The dog runs in and barks, and all of a sudden that's the person whose screen pops up. So you want to make sure that you have the right technology in place for those types of meetings with those controls set so that there are fewer distractions. If you are in a meeting where you are wanting to work collaboratively, you want to make sure that you're selecting a technology that allows everyone to share their screens and to utilize video and sound. And then you want to make sure that you set up some protocols. Hey, to avoid us all talking over one another, if you have something that you want to say, just hold your hand up. And then this is the meeting coordinator. They will call on you. That way it kind of alleviates the issues of people talking over one another and everybody talking at the same time, but also gives you the opportunity to see everyone and to gauge responses, which is the next bullet point. If you want to gauge participants' response to whatever it is that you're talking about, you want to make sure that you have a technology that utilizes video and chat features. Right? So if you need to ask questions of people and you want to see what their responses are or know what their responses are, you'll do the video conference option where you have the video that shows, as well as the opportunity for people to chat and make comments or ask questions in that manner. The thing that we want to make sure you understand is that when you host meetings where you can hear and see the other participants, it really allows you to establish a relationship, which that is the component that is starting to kind of trend downward when it comes to working from home. These relationships are going to the wayside because everybody is responding via email, or they're just not face-to-face having any kind of personal dialogue or the friendly chatter before they get into the business. So utilizing video conferencing and the video capabilities helps you to develop those relationships, helps you build that camaraderie as though you were in the office. And there are a ton of different video conferencing options. I'm just listing a couple here. Zoom, Skype, MS Teams, GoToMeeting, or Cisco WebEx or Cisco Jabber tend to be the more popular ones. Whatever you decide to use, just make sure that you're picking the ones that have the capabilities that you would like to utilize. Zoom was great. When this all first went down, everybody used Zoom. And Zoom realized, okay, this is our chance to capitalize on it. So they tend to be cutting down the number of minutes that you can do the free Zoom. And then after that, it literally cuts you off. I'm sure you've all experienced that. You can upgrade and purchase an annual contract with them so that you can have the unlimited time. But I'm noticing that every time I use Zoom, there's some other feature to it that is newer, that may or may not work for whatever I'm trying to use it for. They're kind of changing as this whole pandemic has gone on, to try and make the most out of their business. I mean, why wouldn't they? But there are a lot of great video conferencing options out there. Just make sure that you're choosing the one that works best for what you're trying to accomplish. So as I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that you only invite those who really, really need to attend, because video conferencing can make it difficult for everyone to participate. You don't want to invite additional folks who really don't need to be there. With regards to meeting etiquette, you are going to follow all the normal etiquette that you would in a standard meeting. However, you'll also want to make sure that you do some different things as well. You want to test your technology, make sure that the camera and the video work, that your Wi-Fi is strong enough to handle it, that if you need screen sharing capabilities, you're able to do that. And you want to do that before your meeting. Amy, Anders, and Jared and I all got together last week to test out the technology, make sure we knew who was going to go in what order, make sure that we all as presenters knew how to handle it when Amy shared the presenter controls with us. So we worked that out so that it wouldn't be such a bumpy ride when we were presenting today. You also want to make sure that you come to the meeting prepared. So review the agenda, make sure you stick to the agenda. If you're the person who scheduled the meeting, you should be in charge of that agenda and keeping things moving along. If people are given an agenda up front, they're going to expect to be able to cover all of the things that are on that agenda. So if you're given an agenda, read through it and make sure that you're prepared to participate if needed. Don't stare at your cell phone. I have mine turned off, but when we're working from home, it might be sitting over here. Put it on silent. Do not pick that cell phone up. It is so easy to tell when somebody is not looking at the screen, right? If they're not looking at the camera, not looking at the screen, you can tell. You can tell when they're distracted. You can tell when they're working, right? Their shoulders might move while they're typing. If they didn't put it on mute, you're going to hear the tapping of the keys. Their screen, without them knowing it, may actually pop up because they might be making more noise than the presenter is. So just be careful about that. So don't work on other tasks during the meeting. Turn off your phone, place your phone on silent, find a quiet area. I had to go tell my husband and my son, you cannot disrupt me during this hour and a half for this session. I need someone else to take the dog because we have a very needy small dog. And she's banged her head on the door a few times trying to get in. But I was like, I cannot be distracted. I need for you guys to just stay away for an hour and a half. You need to work those things out if you're on an important meeting. And you need to make sure that you practice common and respectful courtesy, right? If you don't agree with what's being talked about, or if it is not interesting to you, your facial expressions will show it when you're on video. So make sure that you're doing what you would normally do in a meeting. You shouldn't sit back in a chair with your arms crossed, right? You shouldn't make facial expressions like, oh my gosh, right? Like, be respectful. Be respectful just like you would if you were in front of people in an in-office meeting. And follow up with individuals if you need to do so after the meeting. All right. So now we are going to talk about effectively managing and engaging employees who might be working remotely. The first thing you're going to want to make sure that you do is communicate, communicate, communicate. And with that, you want to make sure that you know when to use email or text, when to pick up the phone, or when to schedule a video meeting. There are certainly times when shooting an email is the best way to go, right? You just need some information, quick email. You're in your car and you're late for a meeting or you need something from somebody, you can text them. And if you really want to get together with somebody, if you're having a regular meeting every single week, why not do a video meeting? I have weekly check-ins with 2 employees that work with me and my boss. They are all done via video conference, even on days when they're like, oh my gosh, you're my only meeting today, so I didn't get dressed up. I'm like, I don't care, I want to see your face. So they, we still video conference, and it's more fun that way. During those meetings, you want to make sure that you're just keeping up with the employee. People who are working remotely, I think we've all hit that point now where we're over this quarantine, this pandemic, and not being able to go do anything. We're over being around our families 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we can feel very, very, very out of the loop on things. So it's important to share information. And when you are managing someone, if there is something going on in your department, whether it's a work product that you're doing, a customer that you're working with, or a new policy or benefit that the company is rolling out, you want to make sure that you are sharing vital information. I will tell you that at Eide Bailly, we pretty much have a meeting every other month with our head honcho. He gets on there. Somebody from our human resources department, typically our chief HR officer, gets on there. We have a new diversity and inclusion initiative. So we have representatives from that initiative get on there, and they provide updates. It's updates on when are we going to be back in the office? How are we handling a new benefit? We've got performance evaluations coming up. Here's what you can expect, right? It's sharing of information so that people feel like they know what's going on. We did it right off the bat. And when we knew that no one was going back to any offices for that short period of time, at least we thought it was a short period of time in March, it was nobody goes to the office. If you need to go to the office, here's what you need to do. Here's the form you have to fill out. And then every other meeting, it's, all right, now we've moved to where some people can come to the office. Here's what you need to do. There were some offices that were mostly back in the office and then had to pull back. It's just sharing of information so everyone understands what the heck is going on and they don't feel left out. Same thing happens with department meetings. We have department meetings every other week. And in those meetings, we find out what are other people in the department working on, what do we have coming up. So we don't feel like just because we're not working in the office together, that we are totally out of the loop. And I think that's really, really important. And I think it's something that Eide Bailly has done a great job with. If you have employees who report to you, schedule regular check-ins. Weekly check-ins might be too much for you. I happen to like weekly check-ins. So then schedule every other week or schedule at least once a month that you're checking in with people. But as a manager, now more than ever, you need to communicate, 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 because people feel out of control and like they're out of the loop. You also want to make sure that with your employees, you are demonstrating empathy, care, and concern. This is a crazy time, right? Working remotely can make a lot of employees feel like they're isolated. It might make them feel frustrated because they don't have access to tools, resources, or people that they used to. We have a lot of single people who work at Eide Bailly, and they live at home alone. And I mean, living alone when you can't leave your apartment and go to a movie or go on a trip or do any of those kinds of things can really emotionally take a toll. So we've actually seen a lot of employees move back home with their parents so they don't have to be alone. We had one who moved to California where her parents lived so she could live with them and at least be around someone. And then once things loosened up, then she moved back to her state that she originally was living in. But we need to recognize that this is a tough time for people. There are a lot of people who need to go into the office, and the fact that a lot of them can't is difficult. So just kind of checking in with them, seeing how they're doing, letting them know what types of resources are available to them through your benefit offerings, whether you have an employee assistance program, if you have counseling or any types of webinars that they can attend. We had a huge initiative at the beginning of September where our employee assistance program had videos on how to handle this seclusion, the feeling of isolation, the depression, the things that were kind of going on around a lot of folks due to being quarantined. And so we put those on people's calendars. They were recorded. If somebody didn't attend the session, they could go back and watch the recording. Your benefit offerings probably have a lot of different tools and resources that you could share with your employees that employees are not even remotely aware of. So if you have a benefit broker, or if you work directly with your benefit providers like Blue Cross or Health Partners or Medica, reach out to those benefit providers and ask them, do you have an employee assistance program associated with our benefit? Sometimes it's also through your life insurance company or your life insurance provider. They will have employee assistance programs. And just ask them, what types of tools and resources do you have to help our employees who might emotionally or mentally be struggling right now due to the pandemic or quarantine? And just, I find it so beneficial to share that information with the employees so that they know what types of options they have to get some help. As a manager, you also want to make sure that you stay organized. You need to keep on top of what your employees are working on to make sure that you don't have one person who's totally overwhelmed and another person who has capacity to take more on. When people are working from home, it's hard to see that. Normally you can tell when they're in the office. One person's frantic and the other one is checking their phone every hour and a half or so to see what's going on Facebook. That means that they might have more work capacity, and the person who's running around like a chicken with their head cut off might need to be able to kind of delegate some of that work to someone. You also want to make sure that if employees are working remotely and there are performance issues, that you are handling them right away. That usually, because they're working remotely and you're not seeing it, It may have been going on for a little bit of time. So the second you find out that there's a work issue, take care of it in a timely manner. And then also be consistent. If you have meetings scheduled, show up to those meetings. Show up on time, don't reschedule them. I had an individual who I had meetings with regularly. They would get rescheduled every single week. It would be a half hour before we were supposed to meet. And my meeting with them would get rescheduled for later in the week for half the amount of time. And it just made me feel like I was unimportant. And you don't want to do that when people are working remotely. So make sure that you're showing up to your meetings as scheduled, avoid rescheduling, and then follow through on any promises that are made. So, if they're telling you that they need some employee assistance support from the employee assistance program, and you tell them you're going to get them the info, follow up, get them the info so that they can move forward. One of the other things that you can do for your employees is to allow for some informality. We are infringing on people's personal space. We are invading their homes with their work. And therefore, we have to kind of take our expectation of formality and lower it just a little bit. We cannot control when our 15-year-old son barrels through the door because he can't hear that you're on the phone with somebody and asks you to make him breakfast or whatever, right? We can't control that. We think we can, but we can't. We can't control a dog barking when the UPS guy knocks on the door. We can't control a lot of things. So it's important to just kind of, let's realize that we are invading people's home life. And so therefore, we need to have a little bit of compassion and empathy and allow for a little bit of informality. Now, certainly, I tell my son, don't barge in. If my door is closed, I don't even want you to open my door. Easier to tell a 15-year-old that than it is a kindergartner, right? For those who have to have little kids at home. But just, have a little bit of compassion if something does go wrong. And you need to allow employees to be their whole self. When they're at home, it used to be you'd go to work, you'd have your work persona, and then you could go home and relax, take a deep breath, and I can just be me while I'm here at home. Well, now they're having to be them and also be their work persona. And it sometimes can be difficult. So this really does offer you a chance to get to know who your employees really, really are, because you get a sense for how they are when they're working remotely. So just be kind with those kinds of things. Remain positive and encouraging so that employees feel more confident and they feel that they're better able to focus on work. There's certainly going to be bad news, with the pandemic. There are layoffs that have to happen. There are reduced hours, furloughs, all those kinds of things. So just be open and honest and try and focus on the positive things as these issues come up. And when they do, share what you can. Represent the company the best way that you can, be empathetic, but don't hide information if an employee really, really needs to know what's going on. Just be open with them about it, be open about the steps that you are taking in order to resolve any issues that might be coming up. And then listen to your employees. Ask them, how are you doing? You don't have to do it every single time you meet with them, but regularly enough so that they know that it's genuine. Right? Invite them to talk with you about things that they're struggling with, and don't immediately suggest a solution, right? Just listen to them. And as you're responding, make sure that you're considering what is best for them as well as the company. If somebody is saying, I really am struggling with this remote work, and you have the ability to let them go into the office occasionally, make that happen. And if you can't, we're going to talk about what to do in that situation. But you just want to make sure that you are occasionally asking them how they're doing and be genuine when you're asking them. Okay, so the last topic that I'm going to cover is the impact of COVID-19 on HR. COVID has certainly brought a whole bunch of different things to the HR world, but these are some of the primary ones that we've noticed and definitely wanted to talk about. We are going to talk about FICA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which applies to companies that have fewer than 500 employees. We are going to talk about the reduction in forces with regards to a layoff versus a furlough. We're going to talk about performance management, workers' compensation, and remote working in general. So FICRA, Families First Coronavirus Response Act, was something that was implemented last April and ran through December 31st. It is no longer required of employers. However, if you are an employer with fewer than 500 employees and you choose to offer paid FICRA leave to individuals who are unable to work because of COVID, there is a tax benefit for that. So if this is something that you'd like further guidance on, I'd be happy to talk with you outside of this, but here's the basics on it. It does offer full pay due to a quarantine because of COVID-19 or your exposure to it, and it's full pay for a period of up to 80 hours in a 2-week period. It also offers 2/3 pay to care for children whose school or daycare is closed due to COVID. So those of you with elementary age children who are forced to work from home, you can actually take time away from work with FICRA leave if you are unable to work. And this truly comes down to, you have to be unable to work, even remotely. If an employee is unable to work because of COVID, then FICRA applies. If they are able to work remotely, even a portion of the time, then the full FICRA would not apply. The thing that an employer has to do is track the leave type. So is it because the employee has COVID? Is it because they were told by the CDC or the state health department that they have to quarantine because of someone in their household or somebody that they had immediate contact with? Is it because they are caring for someone who has COVID? Is it because they're caring for children who don't have daycare? What's the reason? And then the start date of it, and then what their return to work date is. And they want to track that time and the reason so that they can get that tax benefit, which is filed with their quarterly payroll taxes. And Bailey is all set up to help clients with that if that's something that you need assistance with. Again, it is not required, but if you have circumstances of employees who have COVID or are missing work because of COVID, it is something nice to put into play because you do get a tax benefit for those paid hours that are going to those employees. Next thing I want to talk about is a reduction in force. A lot of clients, unfortunately, are having to lay people off. Reductions in force can include a couple of different things. The first one would be a furlough, where you're hoping it's just for a short period of time. The intent is to bring those people back once the economy or once your business comes back up. And with a furlough, it is for, like I said, a short period of time. They can collect unemployment, and they can also stay on your medical benefit plan if you want them to. You can either collect their premiums. As an employer, you can continue to pay the company portion of the premium, or you can put them on COBRA, but they can still stay on your medical plan. But that is just for a short period of time with the hope that they will come back. A layoff is actually a permanent termination of employment. So if you lay people off, you are anticipating that they are not going to return to work for you. And with a layoff, they can collect unemployment and all of their benefits are terminated. They can still get coverage through COBRA, but the employer portion of the premiums is no longer paid. So as you are considering having a reduction in force, those are two different options that you can choose, and we're seeing a lot of clients utilizing both of those. The other thing that we're seeing a lot in the HR world is a focus on performance management. When you need to lay people off, sometimes the first person that you're going to lay off is going to be the folks that aren't performing as well for you. And so what we're seeing more and more is that companies are focusing on making sure that they have performance management processes and tools in place. So there's more performance evaluations that are having, more performance improvement plans that are being put in place for those performers who are not meeting expectations, all the way through to termination of those individuals, or promotion of those individuals who are really stepping up and doing well. So we're seeing a big focus on performance management right now, primarily because there were so many people who were laid off due to COVID, not due to the fact that they weren't great performers, but just due to workload and the availability of people being able to work for a company due to the downturn in the economy, that there's a whole pool of great candidates that are out there. So if you have really, really poor performers, you don't have to keep them. There are likely great people out there looking for jobs right now because they were laid off due to COVID and not because they're not great workers. So huge focus on performance management right now. The next big thing that we have seen is workers' compensation claims. It has been crazy, the number of workers' comp claims that are coming through, primarily because if you are allowing employees to come into your workplace, or customers or clients to come into your workplace, or vendors to come into your workplace, you are opening up Pandora's box with regards to COVID exposure. And so if an employee gets COVID in the workplace, the thing that you want to do is if they come to you and say, I got it from work because I was here the day that Bob was here and Bob got COVID and now I have COVID, just file the claim. Do not fight with the employee about it. Don't say, hey, I know you were at your sister's wedding all weekend. That's probably where you got it. File the claim. Let your workers' compensation provider do the investigation and figure out if they got it at their sister's wedding or if they got it through work, right? This is what you pay for, this is what you pay your workers' compensation insurance for, all right? So just file the claim and let them figure it out. If you have COVID safety protocols in place, make sure you document them. So if you are telling all employees that they have to wear a mask, that they have to register with you, that they have to have their temperature taken, or at least indicate that they don't have a fever, they haven't been exposed to COVID, they haven't traveled internationally, you know, all the questions. If you can document that you have all those protocols in place, as well as the cleaning protocols in place, you will share that with your workers' comp provider. They can take a look at that and everything else that the employee has been doing to help determine, did they get it at work or do you think they got it somewhere else? The other thing is that there are employees who will get injured while working remotely, right? They might fall down the stairs, they might do, you know, they might get carpal tunnel from working remotely, who knows what. But if an employee claims they were injured while working, whether it's at home or some other location, just file the claim with your workers' comp provider. That's what you normally would have done anyway. The provider will then investigate to determine if the injury was work-related or not. And in this COVID era, the investigations aren't as strenuous or vigorous as they were previously for any of those injuries outside of the office location. So it is in your best interest to just file the claim and let workers' comp figure it out. That way, if it does fall under workers' comp, employees ensure that their medical expenses and income are paid while they recover, and you can avoid having an injured employee come back and sue you. So just file the workers' comp claim. A primary responsibility of employers is to provide a safe work environment for employees, customers, and other business associates. That is one of your primary responsibilities. You have to provide a safe work environment. And COVID is affecting that, right? So you have to keep in mind employees who fear for their own health or fear for the health of the people that they either take care of or live with, right? So a best practice is to allow employees to work remotely for as long as possible, wherever that is possible. So if somebody can work from home 100% of the time on an ongoing basis, don't require them to come back into work, even when things open up. If an employee cannot complete their job responsibilities by working remotely, you have to put safety practices in place to protect them while at work. So you have to require that they wear masks. You should provide cleaning products. You need to make sure they answer those standard questions that I mentioned. Track anyone and everyone that enter your workplace for that contact tracing purposes. Work with the health department or the state department if an employee who's been in the workplace is diagnosed with COVID-19, and give all the required notifications to anyone else who was in the office at that time, and require employees to quarantine if they've been diagnosed or designated as someone who's been in contact with someone with COVID-19. That's the biggest thing you can do. If someone says that they've been diagnosed with it or that they've come in close contact, force them to quarantine. Don't allow them to come into the workplace and potentially spread it. And you are going to have some employees who don't want to work remotely, okay? They want to be back in the office. As I mentioned, we have lots of single folks who work, they're living at home alone. They want to come to the office. And if your local government or your state government strongly encourage employees to work remotely, but are allowing them to come into the office, then you can allow them to come into the office in a limited capacity. Maybe it's just one time a week, or maybe you rotate them being in the office with someone else in their department being in the office so that they don't come in close contact. If it is not safe to have employees come into the office, you have to enforce your policies. Don't put your company at risk by allowing individuals to come into the office when they really should not. Okay, so in conclusion, our workforce is going remote in bigger numbers than we could ever have imagined. And employees, surprisingly, I mean, I'm shocked that we've been getting along as well as we have, right? We're showing that work can be done outside of the office and that the majority of individuals actually prefer it. And employers who embrace working remotely, even part-time, will be able to recruit and retain employees because we're able to actually hire people who have skill sets and expertise that we need. They don't necessarily have to have it in our city, right? We can hire somebody from another city who has the exact talent that we're looking for. They don't have to be located here because we've proven in a lot of cases that you can be successful working remotely. The thing is, you have to do it well. And that really is what will make the difference. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Anders so he can talk with you about cybersecurity.
Hi, everybody. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you for just a short time and talk a little bit about key considerations with regard to cybersecurity and your remote workforce. I recognize that a lot of people on the call are probably not IT professionals, probably never wanted to be, but we all do use technology, and we rely on technology more so than we ever have. And so it's a part of what we do, and we need to take more steps to understand it and understand the impact it could have on our business objectives and the things we're trying to accomplish. So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing with regard to the increased risk to remote workers during this pandemic. So there's a recent study that was performed, and they identified that 95% of CISOs, these are security officers for organizations, 95% of them surveyed, they admitted that they sacrificed security in the effort to enable employees to work remotely. So they gave up a little bit of security because they knew this was an important transition to get people to work remotely. Now that had to happen. It was important that took place because we needed to make this transition, but we had left some holes, it left some gaps and things that we need to address as organizations when it comes to security. 63% of the respondents said they experienced an increase in the number of cyber attacks during the pandemic. And this is consistent across all industries. And what we're seeing across the board is that hackers recognize there's disruption and they're taking advantage of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about ransomware and the impacts that's having on society. And lastly, 25% of respondents suffered a ransomware attack or other malware attack since transitioning to remote work. And I went to a conference, I didn't go to a conference, I participated in a conference just like end of last week. And this is with a worldwide leader in cybersecurity organization called SANS. And they had industry experts there talking about the impacts of cyber risks and cyber theft and criminals. And if you took the revenue generated from cybersecurity attacks, if that was a country, it would be the third largest economy in the world behind the United States and China. Just think about that for a minute. The money that's being generated through cyber attacks is so great, it could be the third largest economy in the world. So this is a huge risk. It's a huge area of concern for our organizations. And if we're not taking it seriously or making it part of our executive discussions, then we're at risk. And we need to make sure that we're considering the impact of our organizations and this to our organizations. And this transition to remote workers has, like I said, caused disruption. Let's talk a little bit about why that is. So some of you might recognize this, kind of what we're talking about, or why there's a risk, but I want to review it real quickly just so we understand why there's been a change. On the left side here, we've got our corporate network. And this is when we were in a building. We had our servers and computers and printers all in one location. We protected that organization, that corporate network through a firewall. It was this firewall that enabled us to protect anything that was coming in and out. So if we had to send an email, if we had to visit a website, if someone needed to come and provide us information, the firewall is what, if set up correctly, would protect our organization from malicious actors, from ransomware, or from malware coming into our network. What we've introduced now is that we've got remote workers. We're passing information from our computers here at our employees' houses through their Wi-Fi over through the internet, and then back here to our corporate network. Or we're going out to our cloud services. Many of you might be using things like Dropbox, Office 365, Salesforce. These are services that reside out here on the internet, and you can access them from anywhere. Now, again, previously we were protecting everything through this firewall, but now we're putting data, information out here on our employees' computers. If I've got a financial system back here behind my firewall, and my employees access data, that request is going to come here through the firewall. It's going to request that data, and that data is going to be transferred across the internet to that Wi-Fi. It's going to be broadcast off that Wi-Fi in that employee's house, and it's going to go to that computer. So now we're just what we call in security, increasing the attack surface. We basically, a hacker knows that if they want to get access to our data, it's back here or it's up here. All they know is they can attack right here. And if they got access over here, if they've been able to compromise this network, this computer, they know that they can get access to these things over here. So that's why there's a huge risk. That's why the risk is increased, is because hackers recognize they've got more places they can attack, not just through the firewall. They can go a lot of different places. So what do? Recognizing that your organizations don't necessarily, or your positions in the organizations don't, recognizing you might not be the IT professional, well, what are some things you should do? And so we're going to throw out some key considerations, and I'm going to give you 4 areas to start with. First of all, have you implemented tools for secure connectivity and data transfer? So if you've got an employee sitting out there at home, how do you make sure that the data is being passed between your organization and their home, or their home and the cloud services is being secured? There's tools you can get for that. Or what can remote workers do with your data? So what are they actually doing with it there? Are they taking it off the computer with a USB drive and plugging it into a different computer? Is that data then sitting on that computer, and their employee or that employee's child can come sit on that computer and see that data? There just becomes a whole bunch of questions around what are they doing with the data that you now provide to them outside of that controlled environment. Have you trained and educated your workforce on how to be secure when you're offsite? So providing training and helping them recognize that, hey, your wireless network needs to be configured correctly, because if it's not, our company could be at risk. How do you verify identities of remote workers when they connect to your systems? So if I was in my corporate environment, I'd say, well, someone's got to get into my office and they've got to get to a computer and log in, and that's how I'm going to make sure I know only the right people are connecting. Well, now we don't know who's on the other side of that necessarily. Who's sitting at that other computer? Is it that person, or is it somebody who's hijacked their password? So being able to identify their identities and make sure we know who they are. And we'll talk a little bit about what we call multi-factor authentication, and that's one tool you can use to help identify those remote workers. Are your employees using their own or company-issued computers? Because it's different how you secure them. If they have their own computers, well, now you've got to make sure you encapsulate that company data on that computer that's theirs, making sure that they can't take that and go move it that data other places, or you put it places that are potentially at risk. If it is a company-owned computer, you've got a little more control over that information. You just got to set up those computers correctly. What solutions have you put in place to secure email from malicious actors? One thing that a lot of organizations or a lot of users don't recognize is that email is not a secure way of transferring information. If I type up an email and send it to a customer or to another employee, by default, it is not encrypted. And so it's passing over the internet in clear text. So what are you doing to put in place some secure solutions to make sure your email is secured? And lastly, how do you keep systems up to date and troubleshoot issues that arise? Again, now, if I was in my corporate network, if I was sitting in my office, if I had a problem, my help desk, I could call my help desk. They could come down and look at my computer, maybe make some updates to it. Now, if someone's working from home, it's a little more challenging to update that system to make sure that if there's problems that arise, we're actually fixing the problems. So making sure that you have processes in place in a way to troubleshoot and make sure your systems are up to date. So there's a bunch of things we talk about. There's some things to consider. I'm just going to give you 4 places to start. 4 things you could do that would greatly reduce your risk when working with remote users. The first is security training and awareness. Look for tools and solutions that will help you educate your users on their responsibilities with regard to cybersecurity, because we're all in this and together. And nowadays, it's not the technology that's the greatest risk. It's not the tools. It's the people that are greatest risk. So look for tools like there's a tool called Know Before or Mindcast. These tools provide solutions to help educate and train employees. The tool we utilize a lot is Know Before. Know Before provides a mechanism to actually pretend you are email phishing employees, to actually test them on, send them emails that look like, do the same thing a hacker would do, and see if they'll click on the links. And if they do, then we can provide them, hey, this person needs a little more training. Know Before also provides a complete package of HIPAA training, security awareness training. If you're a financial institution, there's specific regulatory requirements for training. All these can be packaged together in a single training program that Know Before can actually send out to your employees, so you can consolidate all that training. If you have questions on that, we are a provider of Know Before. We can help you kind of come to a solution that will work for your organization. So this is a low cost, quick reward, because you're going to train your people, get to stop this hacks at the place where it's starting. Multi-factor authentication. We need to make sure we understand who's logging in or who's accessing the system. And authentication can be done in 3 different ways. It's something you are, like a fingerprint based iris scan. It's something you know, like a password or a PIN or security question, or it's something you have, like a USB token or a phone or a smart card. And so if we have multi-factor authentication, we say we need at least 2 of these things to be able to authenticate someone to our system. Before we give them access, we're going to verify who they are. We're going to need 2 of these things. And so instead of just having a password, after you type in your password, we're then going to send a PIN number to the phone we have on file. So now you have to have that phone to get that PIN number to be able to go in and access the system. So this is the most common multi-factor authentication we're seeing. If you have questions on this, we've got solutions we can help bring to the table with that too. But you can reduce your risk by, in some cases, to 98%, because this is such an effective tool when it comes to securing access to your systems. A lot of organizations, what they don't realize is that every piece of software has vulnerabilities. It has natural flaws in it. The Windows, Mac, Adobe, Java, even all the solutions you're using for ERP systems or financial applications, they all have vulnerabilities inherent in them, and those vendors are releasing patches. You need to get those out to the employees, and wherever those systems are. A lot of organizations are struggling with, how do we continue to push updates to these systems when we're no longer all in the same building? We're all over the place. And so you've got to get the right solutions in place, and some of the out-of-box solutions that are provided by Microsoft or some of these other system software providers are not quite getting everything they need. And so going to a third party, bringing some tools that will actually allow you to patch your systems and make sure they're up to date is an important step. And lastly, backing up of critical data. With the advent of ransomware, you can see that new organizations are falling victim of ransomware every 11 seconds. This is a huge crisis that our society's facing. This is a lot of money's being made off this. And the biggest thing you can do to protect yourself from ransomware is have backup copies of your data. And making sure that those backups are maintained offline, so that if the ransomware gets on your system, and again, if you don't know what ransomware does, when it gets on your system, it begins to encrypt everything it can find, and anything it can touch, it'll encrypt. And the only way to unencrypt it is with the key, and the criminals have the key, and they're saying, we're not going to give you the key unless you pay us. But if you have backup copies, then everything that they're trying to do to you, you can circumvent by saying, I'm just going to take my backup copies and run off that. But they've got to be offline. They've got to be not able to be touched by the rest of the systems. All right. So if you've got questions on any of these things, we just recognize you're not IT professionals, but we want to at least give you a taste for some of the challenges that are out there, and maybe some initial steps you can take. And if you have questions on any of these, whether it's are my backup systems sufficient? How do I get multi-factor authentication or training, and you train employees? Please don't hesitate to reach out. We can help you with any of those things, point you in the right direction.
It's nice to be with all of you here today, and thanks, Anders. Thanks, Laurie, for your guys' presentation. My name is Jared Johnson. I'm part of Eide Bailly's international tax team. So this topic of remote workforce has been near and dear to my heart well before COVID ever came about. And most times I would see it, it'd be companies trying to relocate somebody to work overseas on projects or whatnot. So I've seen this a lot, and now that COVID has just kind of sped this up. But even before COVID, I was kind of like as our presentation demonstrated, I was seeing a lot of individuals starting to request, well, and it may be a generational thing, I'm not sure, but a lot of individuals would start asking their employers, well, I have a family member in such and such a country. Is it okay if I go work there? And I'll just tell you from a tax perspective, nothing is easy with remote workforce. It generally complicates things, especially with international issues and state issues. And this topic of tax was strategically put at the very end, at least by me. I decided usually this is one of the last things that get discussed. Usually somebody's already moved or starting working remotely well before the tax implications are even considered. And so this is very typical. So we'll just jump in. And the other thing I want to point out is I know a lot of you are not tax professionals. And so this is very, the tax issues may be very foreign to you. We're here to help you. A lot of the HR professionals, and that's why Laurie talked about a lot of like putting in policies or a documented program for your remote workforce. Usually I find the HR professionals are the front line for an organization with a remote workforce. And so a lot of the I think a key to having a successful remote workforce from just an organization perspective, from tax, HR, is to have very good communication policies and procedures put in place. Make sure that if the HR team is the kind of the front lines of this and they're putting in the work agreements to work remotely, they're communicating with the tax departments, with the finance departments of the company. So all of these different aspects do get vetted out with the remote workforce. So we are short on time, so I'm going to fly through my slides. Because of COVID, this has really kind of sped things up, and I think it's opening the floodgates. You're going to see this more and more. You're going to start having, now that COVID hopefully is winding down, you're going to find more and more employees starting to ask their employers for convenience, having work, remote work arrangements, for the convenience of them. Is my belief. It was already moving that way. I think it's going to be accelerated. So these are the common behaviors, taxpayer behaviors or individual behaviors, from having a remote workforce. It's, you're going to have increased flexibility as an employer for your employees. You're going to try to find it. You're going to see individuals, entities try to move from high tax to low tax jurisdiction. And this has already been demonstrated in a lot of cases. Centralized officing is going to be the demand for that's definitely decreasing already. And then like just online purchasing, remote services, all of that's just changing right before our eyes. And so what we're finding is tax jurisdictions, they're kind of on, they're pivoting and they're moving kind of as you go along, and they're making one day they've implemented a lot of COVID friendly tax policies and laws. And what's going to happen is those are going to just end abruptly, and if they haven't already. And so that's one of the changes that are out there. Revenue is down for a lot of tax jurisdictions, so they're going to get rid of a lot of those taxpayer friendly policies and laws, and they're going to start trying to find ways of raising revenue. And there's going to be aggressive audits, especially around residency. These are just kind of some of the very common forms of relief that many of the tax jurisdictions have implemented, just at a high level. The tax considerations, I broke them out into individual and payroll and entity. Payroll kind of overlaps both individual and entity, but it's huge in this area. and trying to get your arms around payroll for a remote workforce. And then international tax all have implications, and we'll just kind of speed through these and what we. So really, the big thing that I see with tax issues is residency. The U.S. has, so with COVID, it forced a lot of people to go back home, and they were changing their residencies, and so that's really a big issue. There was IRS issued a rev proclamation for individuals that come into the U.S. that they would disallow up to 60 days, consecutive days, to try to determine U.S. residency. For people going outbound from the U.S., there's what you call foreign earned income exclusion. It allowed them to continue to claim that even if they had to come home during their international work assignment. And so there's been some policies and procedures, but like I said, these things are going to drop off, and they already have, because of COVID. And then individuals and entities are going to start dealing with residency issues. There's going to be audits as a result. And so you need to really kind of, as an organization, you need to get your arms around where your people are at. Individuals and this is from state perspective, you have the state tax. There's two ways to determine state residency. It's domicile or a statutory state, which is the number of days. And so you can very easily, with this remote workforce, especially with COVID, I'm sure that there's a lot of residency changes, and there's going to be a lot during this upcoming tax season. This is going to be a really huge issue for individuals. The main thing is just to know your workforce, where they're at. Like Laurie said, implement an agreement, and then talk within your organizations. Know whether, this is another thing, just because somebody is working remotely does not now mean that they are an independent contractor. There's still same rules and laws apply between determining whether someone's an independent contractor versus an employee. And there's a big issue here, which this slide demonstrates. Withholding is a big issue. Generally, the general withholding rule is that you pay tax in the location, or you withhold tax in the location which you are performing the service. There is this issue out there, and I'm not going to, on this next slide, that we don't have enough time to really go over, but basically convenience of the employer test in like New York. If you are working in another state at the convenience of the employer, you still have to withhold in the location which you were working, your place of employment. And so this is really a big issue. And New York does a few states here, as you can see. And trying to get your arms around withholding is a big thing. And that's why it's so important to really know where your employees are working. How do you monitor that as an organization? Do you have travel calendars? Are you monitoring people's expenses? Trying to put in policies and procedures that do that is critical in knowing this and being able to track your employees. Entity level issues, there's nexus issues. That's like domicile or residency for an entity. And that will determine whether or not you're subject to sales tax or income tax to a specific state if you're a multi-state organization. And the number of employees that you have in each of these states as they move as a remote workforce can trigger this. And you got to be careful with it. You can trigger a new nexus in a new state. You can trigger increased taxes in a specific state based on apportionment. And then last, just international tax. There are a myriad of issues when you have employees that are working remotely international. And this comes up a lot domestically. Just you might have somebody that's here on a work visa, or and how does this impact them working remotely? Maybe they were working for a US company, they had to go back home to their home country. And what does that do? Or vice versa, and so there's a lot of individual. And so I talked a little bit about the individual or the state nexus issue. The corporate tax when you have international, this is why just moving someone overseas is not an easy thing, because you could be triggering a taxable presence for the US company in that foreign jurisdiction just by having an employee in that foreign jurisdiction. That's called permanent establishment, or PE risk or exposure. So getting your arms around that, where they're working, what services they're performing for your company there, and getting ahead of that before you just move the employee overseas is critical. So, and there are just lots of different things that we need to consider with this workforce, with just having an international workforce. And so again, it's organization, it's documenting where your employees are at, and just knowing and getting your arms around that and communicating well within an organization when things do come up. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Amy.
All right. Thank you all so much for attending, and thank you to our presenters. And we just hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you on future webinars.